This episode of the podcast is brought to you by NutraBio, with no compromise since 1988, no proprietary blends and nothing but clinical dosages, as well as some of the best flavorings on the market. NutraBio has whatever you need, regardless of your sport or transformation. Use code word NATTY at checkout to save 10%. Are you looking for the next step in your bodybuilding career? Are you going to step on stage in 2023? Are you natty? Then you don't belong on untested stages. Now, the official title for this podcast is Natural Bodybuilders Don't Belong on NPC Stages. But realistically, I know that not everybody lives in the United States, and there are many people who are going to listen to this podcast who have no idea about the NPC and whether it's a version of the NPC in your country or your state, or realistically, it's a local untested show. The purpose of this podcast is very, very simple. I can't tell you as a coach how many times I get a competitor who says, I want to be an IFBB pro. And I have to look at them and say, okay, to what end? Now, even if it's not the NPC and the IFBB, right? Let's really take a close look at what we're talking about here in terms of what this means for a bodybuilding career. Now, I once had a coach way back in the day who remembers when I went pro and told me one thing that's always stuck with me. How you feel on this day and how you're going to remember these memories will be something that travels with you for the rest of your career, let alone the rest of your life. That's accurate, right? I had my best friend and his now wife, who was only his girlfriend at the time. Actually, I think they were married at that time. But anyway, my best friend since I was in third grade drove from Connecticut all the way to Chicago when I'd flown from Germany to Chicago to compete just to see me go pro. He does not like bodybuilding, has never been to another bodybuilding show, and couldn't give a fuck less about anything in the fitness industry, let alone my bodybuilding career. But he was there to support me. I remember that. I remember the story of him chipping his windshield on the way there and us going to the Sears Tower and to the Navy Pier. And I remember the color of the trunks I was wearing and that orangey smell of the tan, which realistically, if you compete at all, you're going to remember that. But really what I'm trying to bring up here is that going pro is a very serious thing for competitors. Whatever division it is, however many times you compete, and whatever federation you get it in. Getting a pro card is very important. But afterward, that means something, right? You have to decide, once you're pro qualified, when you're going to take that next step and be a professional athlete and compete against the best of them. That is, unless you already know that you're always going to lose. If you're a natural athlete and you decide that getting an IFBB pro card or competing in an untested federation in your general area is a good idea, you have to understand that even if you beat all the odds, and even if you step on stage and destroy everybody else as an amateur, most people who are in untested federations and are on gear, very good friends of mine, will then say that the head judge told them one thing as soon as they were pro qualified. You have to gain X amount of pounds, or you have to come in X percentage leaner. If you really are at the top of your game and you beat everybody on a National Physique Committee stage, and then you decide that you're going to go pro with the IFBB, understand that your days as a natural are completely over if you plan on competing and wanting to win. Now, I had mentioned this in previous podcasts, and people in the comment section who didn't actually listen to the podcast had said to me, you know, Brandon, there are natural NPC shows. Great. I'll give you 10 minutes to explain to me where the natural IFBB is. Don't worry, I'm not going to wait a full 10 minutes because there isn't one. Just because the show you're competing in is a tested show, where do you go from there? Let alone the fact that those natural NPC shows are not IFBB Pro qualifiers. They're national qualifiers, which means you as a natural athlete then have to take your natural ass all the way to some unnatural show, step on stage with people you know are not going to be on a level playing field, and assume that you will win. I'm not saying that it's never happened. I have a couple of very good friends, a female, Tiffany Marie Stosich, who actually did this, but then she had to decide, okay, there's a 0% chance that I'm going to gain the 30 pounds of muscle in the figure division that they want me to be able to gain. Now, we're talking about a woman in the figure division needing to gain 20 to 30 pounds of solid muscle. So it's not 20 to 30 pounds on a scale. It's 20 to 30 pounds of lean mass when you go through an electrostatic or a hydrostatic measurement. It's impossible. It's never happened in the history of the human genome would you be able to do that, especially if you've already exhausted all of your natural testosterone spikes as a male, let alone a female, that you're going to add 30 to 40 pounds on a regular middleweight-sized male competitor. So the point of this podcast is actually very, very simple. We as competitors have to decide what division we want our career to move into. And in that division, what the ceilings are in terms of our lean mass index, in terms of our fat-free mass index, we have to decide how much money we're going to sink into an industry that is not only oversaturated with competitors and usually oversaturated with shows in specific areas of the United States, but that is incredibly expensive. And that really only pays back its top competitors, which are really top earners for them as a business. So if that's the case, we really have to say, okay, let's say hypothetically I'm one of the best natties in the world. There is no one that's going to step on a natural stage that could beat this guy or girl. Then you have to take it to a federation and a stage where you know there are people who, let's pretend that they felt the exact same way, and so they entered the Contra cheat code, and now they have infinite lives. Okay? You have a bad prep, you're going to show up on stage not ready. They have a bad 3/4 to 80% of the prep. They could have a really good coach that alters some different protocols in terms of gear and come in and kind of slide into home if they needed to. I'm not discounting the hard work or the dedication that it takes to be in this sport at all, even if you are enhanced. And that is how you got your pro card. I've always said, every episode of this, I'm a libertarian, do what you please. But the point of this podcast is very simple. Do natural athletes really have a place on untested stages? As a coach, as a competitor, as a spectator, the answer is no. Even if all of the cards align for you, you're really only going to feel that sense of accomplishment and be able to win that show before you move to the next level. And if what we're talking about is bodybuilding and fitness as a career, one show does not a bodybuilder make. This sport and most of the federations are very much a what have you done for me lately type of situation. And if that's the case, realistically, once you win that natural show and move on to an untested stage, the answer is going to be nothing. Not to mention, if you really take a very close look at how some of these judges' criteria at the natural shows are run, it's basically a carbon copy-paste into what you would be looking for in the NPC Nationals Teen Universe or going through the IFBB. You can look at that judges' criteria and say to yourself, some of this might be unrealistic even by most people in the naturals standards. Interestingly enough, I've talked to NPC promoters who have promoted these NPC natural type shows. First of all, I want to be the first to commend the NPC in sort of following Denny Kakos' understanding way back when in the 80s and 90s when he said there's a division of athletes that want to stay natural while they enter the bodybuilding scene, and that's how natural bodybuilding was born. I'm not saying that the NPC shouldn't necessarily have natural shows. So then, Brandon, what are you saying? I'm saying something very simple. You have to take a look at an industry as a whole and decide how it's going to come from beginning to end. And until the IFBB has a natural offshoot, the IFBB Naturals, or whatever, those NPC natural shows are simply an avenue for people to try out the National Physique Committee and decide if they are going to juice or stick with a natural federation that's not the NPC. There is no hope for any of us hoping to step on stage with clean piss and clean blood and hoping to get an IFBB Pro card. I watch the NPC, I admire the IFBB, but what we're really trying to dial down here is how do athletes become successful? You become pro qualified, and you take that pro qualification and you step on stage with the best of them. And the truth is that no natural competitor in the entire history of mankind would be able to step up against even the last 30% of the best bodybuilders in the world and be able to place against them. They just won't. Now, here come the keyboard warriors in the comments section about, Meshach and Dave Miller and all these guys who managed to, the one who just won the WNBF Pro, right? I'm not saying these guys are not amazing, but you put them next to the size of actual IFBB Pro competitors, and they look like amateur competitors. They'd beat the shit out of me. I know that. There's zero disrespect to any of these guys. But what we're talking about is taking them and putting them into a world that does not operate on the same rules, not the same standards, and will never drug test them ever again. So, my real thought process here is, why doesn't the IFBB have a natural offshoot? And everybody's going to roast me in the comment section about how no one cares about natties and there's no money in natural bodybuilding because it's boring and nobody cares. But if I were a business, I would. I'm not saying they should, because I love my federation and I believe that we do drug testing the best, and I believe that my federation does natural bodybuilding the best. But ask yourself as a competitor in these NPC natural shows, why don't they start a natural federation in terms of the IFBB? And the answer is very simple. Unfortunately, just like I stated 30 seconds ago, it's not where the money is. Not for them. They would need to reinvent their entire business model to include a clean, drug-free standard of bodybuilding. It would be pretty impossible to do that since they run, I don't know, the only monopoly on untested bodybuilding that everybody knows about. So ask yourself as a competitor, I'm going to diet for God knows how many weeks. I'm going to stick to my own standards in terms of the ethics I believe that the sport should be run at in terms of my federational standards. And I'm going to look for shows in my local area to compete on an even playing field with athletes with the same possibility of winning or losing. And then I'm going to jump into a competitor pool of people who follow none of those rules or standards and get a mud hole stomped in my ass. Guys, girls, what we want to do is compete. So you as an athlete need to ask yourself, where am I going to take this afterward? This is one show. What do I do next? And I would argue that it's pretty cut and dry that you would want to continue to compete. If what you want to do is continue to compete, you really should align yourself with a show, promoters, and other competitors who follow those same rules. I want to start the ending of this podcast by saying this. National Physique Committee, International Federation of Bodybuilders, and everyone who is a member of either one of those. You're great. Love watching your shows. Whether or not we have disagreements in terms of placings or what you do with your money or the deaths that we've been seeing in the last couple of years, you guys are a business. You've made your position known. You do it to the best of your ability, and we all see it. Awesome. Competitors who are natural understand that the NPC and the IFBB were not made for you. They're not going to edit their standards for you. And once in a blue moon, someone will slip through the cracks and get that coveted IFBB Pro card, and they will officially retire the second they walk off stage with it. There are dozens of federations out there that are geared for you. Pun intended. Get it? Geared for you. Choose the one that wants you to be successful with the rules you've placed on yourself. And I promise you, money, sponsorships, all that stuff aside, I'll tell everyone listening to this podcast the same thing that I tell my competitors who believe that they belong in a division that I don't believe they belong in. I've seen men's physique guys want to be men's classic. I've seen men's bodybuilders think that they're classic guys. I've seen women's bikini girls go into women's bodybuilding for God knows what reason, other than the fact that they see themselves as that identity. It feels good to call yourself what you think you see in the mirror. There's only one thing that feels better. Fucking winning. So if what you want to do is win, you really need to play the landscape and get the lay of the land in terms of what you're going to do next. And if what you're going to do next is compete again, choose a federation that's going to allow you the same ethic and moral code that you've placed on yourself. And if that ethic and moral code is that you don't want to use performance-enhancing drugs, then choose a federation and a way forward with your career that will allow you that standard. And if you do think that it's okay to use those things, more power to you. I'm a libertarian. You can do with your life what you choose. And I will love to watch you go up there on the NPC stage, murder it, and get that IFBB Pro card. But if you're someone in the first pool of those competitors that wants to be in the second pool of those competitors, it might be time to reevaluate. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by bgfitonline.com. Battleground Fitness can train you in any sport that is currently on the market, whether it be strongman, powerlifting, stage competitions, and all genders are accepted. So if you have a transformation that you want to make, whether it be on stage, on a platform, or even just in your photos, BG Fit Online has a coach that could help you. So head to www.bgfitonline.com today and start your transformation. Thanks for listening to the U-Natty States of America, guys, and be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and rate us on anywhere that you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get them. We want to hear from you, so put some comments in the comment section and let us know what you want to hear about us next. 3-time Mr. Natural Olympia, 2-time Mr. Universe, Brandon Lirio, signing out.